Hi, my name is Sean Cricker. I am a son of God. I've been a disciple of Jesus for 20 years, and I'm an elder in a small fellowship called People of the Way. But perhaps what qualifies me to speak to you today, outside of the infilling of the Holy Spirit, of course, is that I feel called and compelled by the Lord to share with his sons and, of course, his daughters on the topic of conquering as disciples of Christ. And so this word conquer and this call is long-standing. And in fact, if you read Revelation chapters 2 and 3, Jesus writes 7 letters to the 7 churches of the day. And in those letters, he is very forthright and clear in his words, certainly much more so than when he was on earth. And in fact, he is quite militaristic at times and uses throughout all the letters this command to conquer. And he shares with us the consequences of not doing so, as well as the rewards of doing so. And this has long resonated with me. And I think it's instructive to remind ourselves that the Lord himself is a man of war. That is in Exodus 15, verse 3. Of course, he's a lot more than that. But in the context of toward the end of the age, the battle is heating up. I think we can all testify to that already. And he wants his sons to be most effective as his disciples. And you'll know in a war that your effectivity or the effectiveness of someone in a war or a unit in a war or even a resource in a war is how successfully and well it is deployed. And to do that, one requires, of course, a battle plan. And this is an essential part of any side's victory, is grounded and rooted in the strategy and the deployment of their resources in the best possible manner. And so what I just want to clarify is that while Jesus has concisely and unanimously defeated Satan in the war, his judgment day is still waiting, and his sentence is still to be implemented. And in God's wisdom, until that great and terrible day, the Bible tells us, Satan and the hordes of hell are still being given the freedom to do much damage upon mankind. And so it's within this context of this spiritual war that rages on that I want to speak to the sons, and it goes without saying the daughters, but I'll keep it to the sons in my wording today. And so this video is specifically geared to any son and fellow disciple of Christ who is seeking to lead a more faithful and fruitful walk with the Lord. And perhaps in particular, and in the context of what I want to talk about, seeks to be more effectively deployed in the spiritual war going on around them. So if that's you, hang out with me for the next 10 or 12 minutes, please. And what we're going to do is get into some of that, the specifics around the battle. But this is a battle plan to enable us to fight like a spiritual man. And so just a reminder of what some of those battle plans have looked like in the past. And these perhaps are familiar to you. Certainly, D-Day should be very familiar to you within the context of the significance of this battle and in the Second World War, and that essentially this is where that war was won or lost. But as you can see, there was a lot of planning and strategy and that went around that specific battle. If you look at the battle lines, the units and the resources and the weapons that needed to be deployed when and where because of all the intelligence that had been gathered. And without this, of course, there would have been no victory. And so in the same sort of spirit and with the same type of mindset, I want to propose that we as those fighting a very intense and furious spiritual battle, surely we should be those who too have a battle plan. And so in that regard, this battle plan is a checkup. That is to say that this battle, as we recognize, as we understand it, does not end. That is until Jesus returns or calls us home, whichever comes first. But unlike World War II that had an end date, this one doesn't, not necessarily in our lifetime. And so it's a checkup to help us ensure that we are continuing to be faithful and effective in the battle. And the 4 B's related to this battle plan are to belong, and that speaks to being part of a discipleship group or battalion, to build, and that is to be able to build our spiritual home, and then to have and recognize that there are personal battlegrounds that we will fight this war on, and that relates to becoming spiritually free, where we have to deal with the devil and with our flesh, as well as being spiritually trained. And we'll get into that a bit later. And then we have public battlegrounds, and these are the public domain where we fight our spiritual war, and we recognize that as being on the home front, on the church front, at work, in our resting, in our suburb, and in our city. And of course, any battle requires that you bring something to the battle. And in this context, we must have and use our spiritual resources and our spiritual weapons or our spiritual armaments. And we'll get into that a bit more in due course. But suffice to say, this is the battle plan that we can use and in ensuring that we are deployed in a most effective manner. And that battle plan goes with a whole lot of definitions relating to each of those elements, which you can read on it or here if you freeze the screen. Okay, but before we get into the nuts and bolts of the battle, I just want to touch again on this the two of the other B's being to belong, and that is to a band of brothers. And this relates to maturing spiritually and involves having both the spiritual life and spiritual skills of a disciple. And this is what it means to be mature and equipped follower of Christ, culminating in Jesus' command to disciple the nations. And accordingly, the core business and associated fruit of a mature Christian faith must involve the being and making of disciples. And essentially what we're getting at here is that to do that, one needs to belong to a band of brothers. And then to build. And this is to build your spiritual home using spiritual blueprints, which we have also devised, and I'll share with in a moment. But isn't it interesting that in a day and age where strategy, analysis, and reporting is given such preference and precedence in almost every aspect of society, it seems conspicuous, at least to me, by its absence in discipleship discussions or circles. Accordingly, Call to Conquer has undertaken to create a tool to empower both discipler and disciple in their joint quest for spiritual maturity. And it does so by examining, ordering, and resourcing a few biblical discipleship metrics in a comprehensive and free discipleship assessment report. And it is this report that can be used to build a spiritual home for a spiritual man that's being called to conquer. And so there's just a little demo of what those spiritual blueprints look like, and their 10 associated key or core values and vital behaviors. And I'll touch on this again towards the end. But so belong and build, that's not what today is about. Today is talking about the battle, and that is going to spiritual war. And if we are to battle, then we must know who, how, and where we're fighting. And so this third element is really where the rubber hits the road. And this is the point of our faith. You could say this is the point of our faith and the purpose of discipleship, which is actually to conquer. But to do so, we need to know, as we've already said, who we're up against, that is the battle lines, how we're going to fight them, that is being battle ready, and where we're going to fight them, and that is the battlegrounds. And one more thing, of course, we're going to need to have a scoreboard, or in this context, we've called it a battle plan. So let's dive in. So know who you're fighting. So no surprises here. Enemy number 1, the devil. Enemy number 2, the flesh. And enemy number 3, the world. And you can read the details of what those constitute there by pausing the video. but I'm going to carry on here by showing us where we can find this on our battleground. And this is within the context of being a personal battleground and finding spiritual freedom. And that is conquering the devil by overcoming our brokenness and strongholds in our life, and conquering the flesh, that is our sinfulness, through being filled with the Spirit. What we don't have here in this right now is the world, but the world is covered under the public battlegrounds segment, which we'll get onto in a moment. And the definitions thereof, that is what I've just covered, can be found here. All right, and next we move on to ensuring that we battle ready, which is know how you're fighting. So knowing who you're fighting is one thing, but knowing how to fight is quite another. This is a spiritual battle, and so we must fight as spiritual men who are spiritually trained, spiritually resourced, and spiritually armed. And you can read the small print there, but in getting into being spiritually trained, this falls under the personal battleground. And to be spiritually trained relates to an understanding and practicing the spiritual disciplines. And this includes scriptures, confession, prayer, fasting, service, Sabbath, silence and solitude, and exercise. And the definitions thereof have been included for you there. It also includes what we must bring to the battle. And here we understand that we have been given spiritual resources, that is knowledge, time, money, and talent. And we have been given spiritual weapons. And those are our gifts, our service, our prayer, and our testimony. And the definitions thereof have also been included over here for your reading and is part of the tool itself. Okay, and then lastly, moving on to the battlegrounds. And so who you fight and how you fight only makes sense if you know where you're fighting. So knowing your battlegrounds is a critical part in conquering your enemies. And here we're talking about 7 battlegrounds, that being yourself, your home, your church, your work, your Sabbath, your suburb, and your city, with the details included there for your information. And how this plays out on the Battleplan checkup is to say the self is under my personal BBB checkup. That is under belonging, building, and the personal battleground. All right. And then the remaining 6 are, let me just go back here, are under the public battlegrounds. And that being under the home, that is as a spouse, or could be a singleton, or as being an adult, but also most likely as a parent and raising kids, and then within the context of our family and our friends. And then in the context of church, that is discipleship, as well as Sunday, our Sunday fellowship. In the context of work, of course, it's simply work. In the context of Sabbath, it's our resting. In the context of suburb, it's our neighbors. And in the context of city, it's our needs. So this is the public BBB checkup. And here we recognize that we need to bring things to these battlegrounds. And the things that we, of course, are talking about are our spiritual resources and our spiritual weapons. And that we should be deploying these into each of these public battlegrounds. And here, by way of example, I've just highlighted, for example, being married or not, and how we would deploy, for example, time, gifts, and prayer into that aspect of our home life. And the question is then, of course, am I investing my time sufficiently in my marriage? Am I deploying my spiritual gifts into my marriage? And am I praying for my marriage? Just to use 3 of the available 8 resources and arms the Lord has given us. And then the same question goes for our discipleship group. And the same question would then go for our neighbors. And so this battle plan checkup allows us to cross-reference all our public battlegrounds with all the resources and weapons the Lord has given us. Make sense? Okay, so if I've piqued your interest, and this is something that you feel could help equip you better in your deployment in the spiritual war, then I'd say take the red pill. Go to calltoconquer.org and start with Call to Conquer's discipleship assessment to better equip and deploy you, that is to build, the building element, better equip and deploy you for your spiritual battle. I trust that you are blessed by this teaching, and I hope to see you on the battlefield soon, man of war. God bless you.